How's it going? So I am Justin A.Williams. This is Myth Mental Health. I'm the author of Reborn Virtues Constellation, which you can get on Barnes & Nobles and Amazon.com and other places where books are sold. So today what we're going to talk about is the myth of Atlantis. The myth of Atlantis is not very long. It's mentioned by Plato in a line in one of his writings, I believe The Republic, where he talks about a great civilization that was highly advanced way, way before even Sumer. And that even though at his time, there were echoes of those technologies, the spiritualisms, religions, philosophies, and literally buildings and tools from that era, that pretty much everything was destroyed in the ocean. The great wave or cataclysm happened. People think now, some people think that it's during the Younger Dryas when the great melting of the ice caps happened. Other people think that this could have been millions of years ago and some other destruction happened, that they talk about it in the Mahabharata with the great destroyer and transformer. God Shiva comes and destroys a city and says, "I am become death," the famous line from Oppenheimer. Now, what are the lessons we can learn about Atlantis? I think it's similar to what we can learn about the story of Osiris in Egyptology, in Egyptian religion. They're probably talking about the same era. A lot of myths are not talking about times during the time that they were written down or discussed primarily. A lot of myths are actually talking about a prior civilization. You can see this in the stories of the Hopi. You can see in the stories of, of the Lakota and other cultures that they talk about 6 or 5 or 4 great eras of man, right? The Greeks talk about, at first it was Age of the Titans, which is a golden age. If you look at Aztec and Mayan spiritualism and religion, they talk about different suns, right? That one guy wanted to be the sun, and then another guy got to be the sun until the end of days, where all cycles end and we get to a peaceful place. This could be a place like in Christian theology, where Jesus lives with people for 1,000 years and then raptures everybody, or talk about the Kali Yuga, which is that ends, and then in Hinduism you have the Great Golden Age. Everybody talks about a return to the Golden Age, but where do we even get the idea of a Golden Age before? It's from Atlantis, at least in the Mediterranean sense. So Atlantis is destroyed, but I think the story of Atlantis is most powerful because we can see how Atlantis destroys itself. Atlantis, if I can imagine, being a highly advanced civilization, must have been advanced in ways that also caused them to do what we do now today, which is to lose connection with all this. If you look at this, most of my videos, I've had the video turned towards my house, but now I have it turned towards the beauteousness of nature. And I think when mankind started to lose its connection to nature, there's a lot of pain and peril, but there's also a lot of love there in nature. And I'm not someone who says that we should need to return away from living comfortably, the comforts of modern life. We should definitely have those. There are reasons why we try to avoid pain and try to avoid arduousness. Right? It's not easy being human, even with the comforts of modern world. If you follow Bjorn Lomborg, or if you follow other philosophers of this day, they talk about how we are living in the best times of human civilization as we know it. And it's probably true. There's less war now, less poverty, less global destruction, and some people, even though the consensus says otherwise, there's less climate destruction in terms of destroying resources, in terms of overheating, than there's ever been before, or there's less than we think there is. Right? We are in a time of great loneliness too, in a lot of places, and great hatred in a lot of ways. But overall, those things existed before too. I mean, you want to talk about hatred? Let's talk about the wars between Protestants and Catholics. Let's talk about the destruction of cultures that happened rampantly throughout the whole world, right? Rome destroys the culture of different peoples in Italy, right, and absorbs them, right? The colonists, colonial age, right? Even tribal cultures attacked and destroyed each other. It's been happening War is as prevalent as anything. It's probably the first real religion, if you think about it. But I digress, and we'll talk about more of that later. But Atlantis must have gotten to a point where it lost touch of something essential about being human. Right? No matter how advanced we get, we still want to root ourselves in something. The way this can help us in our mood and our habits is understanding that you may have something you're nostalgic for, something that used to really connect you to yourself, connect you to others, root you in something happy. It could be a memory. It could be something that someone said once or twice. It could be a person. It could be an animal. And then you lost that thing. And then for years and years you were wayward, or maybe you didn't even notice how wayward you became. But something in you was tired. Something in you was saying, I just don't want to get out of bed. And then that spirals into a self-destruction as big as Atlantis could have been for the world. And you're feeling like there's no song, there's no myth, there's no hymn that can pull you out of it. This depth of despair, this depression can be murderous, right? I mean, I think one of the leading causes of death in teens is not believing in themselves, right? I saw a survey that said that a lot of teenagers will say something about other people as a compliment, but they won't say something nice about themselves. And I think this is an epidemic of self-esteem. I think now more than ever we need people who can uplift each other just by saying, I'm here to listen, right? Maybe that's what Atlantis needed. Maybe Atlantis should not have been, if it was just in where people think in the Sahara. It needed another civilization to keep it on its toes. Maybe there's a good thing about conflict sometimes, even conquering in different civilizations. It synergizes and renews values, and it keeps people on their toes, right? It keeps people connected, even though sometimes it does the opposite. That duality is always in existence, in myth and in life. That's why I love myth, because myth is not false stories. It's the truths of life rendered into a metaphor. And I think we should always remember that about myth, that it does speak truths. So for us, people who don't want to have a personal Atlantis happen to ourselves, to be washed away or burned away or destroyed by some angry god, what we need to understand is that there is great things to be learned about innovation and technology, AI, things of that nature. But we have to find something that roots us into what was pure about our own specific lives. I'm not asking you to root yourself into a memory of mine. I'm not going to be someone who says, no, you need to root yourself into what I love, into what I do, and what works for me. A lot of influencers out there that are saying, I conquered this and I did this and I came from this and here are my 10 steps. That's great that works for you, but people need to find it themselves. Some people will actually tell you not to go on a journey, to not read things that are books that are outside of your paradigm. This is folly. Read, consume, look. There's no need to be afraid of being convinced out of a central narrative. If something's a central narrative to you and is your backbone and is your core, you will not be convinced out of it. But if you find yourself convinced into a new way of being, or with one that reflects an old way of being, maybe that's for the best. Maybe that's a good thing. It's okay. It's okay to find faith in something that you never thought you'd have faith in, to find love in someone that you never thought you'd have love in, to find connection in something that you never thought you'd connect to. That is the power of beyond myth. That is the power of what is actually behind the myth, in the thickest of veils, And in that thick veil, that's what we find. What Joseph Campbell, I think, would say is, and Jung would say, is God, but really is you, the reflection, the mirror. Remember, miraculous comes from the word miracum, which is a Latin word for a revelation of what is true but what is hidden. Even the Romans understood that beyond just stories of, Arachne and Athena or Minerva, or their stories of the gods. I think the reason why there's not a lot of myths from Rome is because the Romans were aware that there is a veil there and there is something to puncture through it, and then there's a true spiritualism. I think the Romans were on a journey through a spiritual life that used to really uplift them and create a great republic when they were expanding and learning from other places. No coincidence that Alexander the Great didn't just build cities, he built libraries, right? In the Islamic Golden Age, they built libraries. In Andalus, in Spain, when Berbers and Africans and Arabs came together and conquered Spain, they built libraries, right? They were obsessed with knowledge, consuming knowledge, figuring things out, considering things, thinking of things, talking of things. Civilizations that have dialogue are great civilizations, but you must allow for dialogue. In your own life, you must be willing to listen and talk to people who are different than you and the same as you and beyond you, and have a conversation. Get good at the skill of debate and this conversation. I remember one time this person, his name was Kurt, he used to just sit in what was called the Frisk Center back at Princeton when I was there. He would sit and do his work. And one time, or a couple of times, I walked by him and he would just talk to me. He would just debate with me about anything. You know, he knew I was a religion major, so we talk about religion or philosophy usually. And I thought, this is so wonderful. Why don't I do this more? Why do I keep going out and drinking too much or having too much partying? Yeah, as fun as it can be, I'm doing things that are not constructing me. If you think about life, things that are on a pendulum of Thor's hammer, the hammer is striking and being destructive in my life. Why don't I build, right? Why don't I use college to excite my mind and my intellect? Why don't we change the whole paradigm of how we advertise school to be inquisitive and build skills that are going to build us together and build great citizens, right? We don't even have civics in school anymore. So I say this to remember that Atlantis must have lost something crucial. And it's not just a connection with nature as in I need you to walk and garden and hug trees. No, it lost something about the flow and the righteousness and the power of connectivity to the nature inside of us, and connecting in a way where we know ourselves, right? That's what it says in the Temple of Delphi. Know thyself, but also to know others. And that doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean that you're the same. I don't like it when people walk around saying people have to think the way I do. I don't even think that's good parenting. No, you have to have a process, perhaps like I do, right? The process of analyzation, of following scientific method and things that we've discovered are great. But you don't have to agree and think like me. Because if you do that, we don't want to create a clone society either. We don't know what really befell Atlantis, but something about it, if it existed, which I think it did, I think there was a civilization. I don't think Plato would have just said that off willy-nilly. I think it fell because of an internal rot. I mentioned the story of Osiris. Jordan Peterson gives a great lecture on the story of Osiris, where he talks about how Osiris must have represented law and order and society, but also that one singular mindedness that stopped him from being vigilant. Everything was comfortable, and he didn't notice Set, and he didn't notice his own dear brother's anger at him, because in a lot of versions of the story, Osiris is guilty. Osiris doesn't notice because he's not vigilant, and his senses are not sharp, that it is not Isis, his wife and sister, who sleeps with him one night. It is the wife of Set in disguise. And Set will not be appeased. He will not forgive Osiris, because Osiris is vision itself. He's the god of love. He's the god of creativity. He's the god that creates music and farming and artwork. This is a person with vision beyond vision. Senses beyond senses, and you can't tell that that's not your wife with you? Maybe he could. Maybe he found the temptation, as I talked about in the other video. And then Set goes about doing what he did, which is planning to murder him, and then he punishes him, and we get the whole spiral of the story. Atlantis might have been the same way. They lost a sense of vigilance. They lost a sense of vigilance, not necessarily in the sense of stopping crime, right, or being heroes, vigilant. You lost a sense of vigilance in being aware of what talents and senses you do have to warn others and yourself that, hey, we are at a place of negligence and naivety. And if we don't stop ourselves, if we go too far in this direction, something's going to be a check, right? There's always a check. Why do you think the founding fathers came up with checks and balances? These were men of high understanding of Egyptian religion and philosophy. These are people of high understanding of the Greeks and the Romans and the British, right? Locke, can't forget him, of the French, Rousseau and Voltaire. These are people who were connected with knowledge from ages before them and of their own time. And they understood how life works, that a check and balance comes in life no matter what we do. And that's why they inculcated into the government. So I think, my point here is not to necessarily be like, I think his name is, I forget his first name, but it's Carson. He's a great thinker in terms of esoteric information and Atlantis and things like that. If you like Ancient Aliens, I think he's been on that before. But I respect a lot of those thinkers because they do investigate the past with a fearlessness. And I think we must all be fearless in how we prevent fear from controlling our lives. And I think sometimes our disconnect with nature and its rules and its laws is an abandonment towards fear. We go into our buildings and our houses and our 9-to-5s because we are afraid of making a world that truly could serve us without selfishness. Now, this is not to say that, we shouldn't have this type of economy or that type of economy or socialist versus capitalist or all that stuff. Democracy versus totalitarianness or democracy versus communism, all that stuff. This is to say that there is all the information we need to understand humanity is already there. We've lived enough lives. We've seen enough civilizations rise and fall. We can do this. We can do this now. By understanding the past, we can right now have a society that could work for, if not everybody, most people, as many people as possible. But we don't do it. And it's not just because of personality differences. I used to think that's why. It's not just because the haves want to keep it and the have-nots don't. I think it's because we don't listen to that small, still voice inside of us, that consciousness, that conscience. And I say conscious and consciousness because I think it's alive. It acts like a conscious. Socrates used to talk about his spirit that he used to be in touch with. Some kind of spirit that would help him with his math problems and his philosophies and be a dialogue to him. Now imagine the power of that. Growing up with a dialogue in your ear. That would make you a powerful, intelligent human, wouldn't it? Now that's exactly what Socrates became. The Egyptians talk about the soul is split into the Ba and the Ka and different aspects, and these things communicate with us always. People might think this is silly, but we are learning through science that there's an intelligence to our muscles, there's an intelligence to our bones. Our cells are intelligent in a very, very fascinating way. And what we once thought was junk DNA might actually be the containment of the past traumas, past events, past memories, past innovations coming through to us and imbibing ourselves in that. Now, how's that any different than ancestor worship? Why do you think that people used to worship their ancestors back in ancient antiquity? And I don't mean worship in the sense that they thought they were gods. What really worship meant was that this is a veneration, it's a respect, there's a debt owed. And look at our society today. How little we regard and how we disrespect our elders. I will ask the millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha here, how much time do you spend with your grandparents? How much time do you spend just with someone who might be 60, 70, 50 years older than you? This is essential. This is something we used to do. People used to live multiple generation houses. Why do you think a lot of people who are immigrants do so well sometimes? Not just economically, but just in terms of their character, how they feel, a lack of depression. It's because a lot of people come here and they live in multi-generational homes. They live with people other than their families, just to get a start. They live together in communities, right? We used to be the Greek community, the Italian community, and the Black community, and we could function together because we were learning from each other in a way of shared experiences and shared trials. And your grandfather could teach you how to overcome things in a way that might have been lost in your generation, giving you an advantage. I feel I have an advantage because I read myth and because I carry many of the values of my grandfather and my grandmother. I don't agree with everything, but I carry a lot of their values, and it's made me successful in life because I am myself unique, because a lot of people in my generation don't do that. W.E. Du Bois called it the talented 10th. You're not a talented 10th just because you're privileged. It has nothing to do with your wealth or where you start in life. It has to do with the responsibility you take for things in your life and the responsibility you take to improve yourself. Myth teaches us that it is on us to improve ourselves and then impress the gods. Right? You want a constellation, Hercules? You're going to have to go through these trials. Odysseus, you want to go home? You have to learn temperance. You have to learn humility. And you have to learn loyalty to your wife. You have to find Penelope, right, his wife, in your heart again and drive through the forces of Poseidon, a god himself, to find it. The ending of the Odyssey is one of the greatest endings ever written in stories, maybe the greatest, because it teaches us that no matter the distraction, if we focus on love, if we focus on our immovable spot, as I talked about in the other video, before this one, we can find our way through any obstacle. And remember what the Stoics say, the obstacle is the way. So that's a little bit of my 2 cents about what I think can give us an advantage over Atlantis. We have not been destroyed by the Younger Dryas or any flood yet. We've not been destroyed by our own hubris. But I think we have a chance. We have a chance in society. And I think that, unlike Atlantis, we haven't gone too far. But it's important to understand balance, right? Within balances, B-A-L, right? B-A-L used to be extended in the Canaanite to mean Lord, right? So that word is already connecting us to a higher esteem, right? When people think of God and they think of the gods, they always think of this notion of another being judging and coming down on you and proposing things to you or tempting you or helping you. It's always other. But they don't understand that it's just an ideal. It's just a personality goal. It's just a character goal. The gods, or God that you root yourself in, science that you root yourself in, to always improve you, to your maximized self. And when you do that, that's when you fulfill the Trinity within you, right? That you were once a child, then you became a person, an adult, and you will ascend, not necessarily to be an old person that cannot function, but to be your highest self. And that's really I think the true answer to the riddle of the Sphinx, as written in Oedipus. So if you'd like to know more about, obviously, myth and how that can correlate with mental health, please stay tuned to my future videos. Like, share, and subscribe. Definitely share. I'd like to get my shares up, but I hope you just enjoy these videos. I'll keep making them. And remember, I'm the author of Reborn Virtues Constellation, which you can get on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. Thank you so much. This is Myth Mental Health. Like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.